Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Can you hear me now? Yes. All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out. And yes, usually when I speak at conferences, the first slot in the morning is always the parse one because everybody's still kind of waking up from a hurricane coma or whatever it might be. But on a serious note, I was so honored when the National Scleroderma Foundation asked me to be the closing keynote speaker. And I tell you, this is my second conference. My first conference was 2013 in Atlanta. And these conferences are just, they're rock and roll, man. This is just incredible. The people that I have met have been inspiring. I've met some new friends. I've met some people that I met back in Atlanta in 2013. And we truly are, as Robert said, we truly are a scleroderma family, because we know what each one of us is going through. I was talking to some people yesterday, and I happened to have lived in Southern California at a time, and I went through a 6.9 earthquake. I was 2 miles away from the epicenter, and we thought we were going to die in the earthquake. It was the Northridge earthquake of January of 1994. And to try to explain a 6.9 earthquake to somebody who's never been through one, it's like us trying to explain to friends and family what living with scleroderma is like. They listen, but I think in a lot of cases they really don't understand. And so many of you over the last couple days have really inspired me because, we live, I call it. This disease, it was uninvited. We didn't want it in our lives. We didn't ask for it to be in our lives. But for some reason, it decided to be part of our lives. And one of the things that's important is that we realize that. And as I go through my talk today, we'll really talk about, what's the purpose? Why did this happen to us? And I'm sure every one of you that is living with scleroderma has asked yourself that same question at some point. But before I get started, I really wanted to sort of be able to celebrate some of the heroes that I have met here, but also in reading The Voice. How many people read The Voice when they get it? Isn't that awesome? I tell you, pretty much when I read people's stories, I start to tear up. I start to cry because I know what they're going through. I understand. And I think that's the biggest part of us being able to continue to live with this. But this is not my clicker, so hopefully I get this right. There we go. One of my first heroes is Marie Coyle, who just recently retired from both the New England, executive director of the New England chapter, but also she had scleroderma when she was 12 years old. She's now 83 years old. And if you know Marie, she is one tough cookie. She is definitely a New England gal. There's no doubt about it. I first met her back in probably the mid-2000s, and listening to her story was so inspiring. She actually helped to form the National Foundation. She's been very integral in that. Her husband also, Walter Coyle, has also written articles on scleroderma as well. His was actually some of the first things that I read that were encouraging. Unlike when I first was diagnosed in 99, a lot of the books I was reading, articles I was reading were not very encouraging. And so I started to lose hope, and also my family started to lose hope. But it's also the daily struggle that we go through. And so what I also want to do is start to also celebrate, told you, here we go. The first person I wanted to talk about is Chanel White. And I didn't know if she was here with her husband, Noel. Are they happen to be here by any chance? No. But I read her story. She's a teacher. And she's fed by a feeding tube. So to explain to her elementary school kids, there's a nonprofit that has a teddy bear with a cloth feeding tube. And that's how she, instead of showing the kids her feeding tube, this is how she was able to explain and educate her young students about what she was going through. And the bond that's created with her and her students is phenomenal. Some of her quotes were, "Even though scleroderma rules your body, it doesn't have to rule your happiness." And that is such an important aspect of what we're talking about. And also she said that, that you can't give up. You just got to keep fighting. My next one is Linda Baum. Linda, when I read her story, was a lot like me, an overachiever, a workaholic, didn't have time to worry about what was going on with her body, but she was just so engrossed in her work that she also started to have some issues. She had a double lung transplant, and the motivation and inspiration that she gave to her husband as well was fantastic. She's a fighter. She said, "I'm not competing for this disease to be disease of the year. I'm delighted to be alive. I know who I am. I'm still me, and I'll never give up." And I think for some of us, and I know at times early on when I was diagnosed and went through my renal failure, that there were days I felt like giving up. It's just like you're kind of going through this all by yourself. Even when you have a support group, you still feel at times like you're by yourself. And so she was also an inspiration. Now, the next couple I'm going to share with you, this is really an interesting story. I planned this PowerPoint, I finished it up last week, and I was hoping to meet some of the people I was going to talk to. So at the opening on Friday night, the opening keynote on Friday night, I'm sitting right back in that back row, maybe 2 rows back, and all of a sudden, the couple that I was going to talk to sat right in front of me. And I don't think that was by accident. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And that couple was Joyce and Kim right down here. The Washingtons. Yeah, stand up right there. I've spent a lot of time with these two in the last couple days. I love them. They're awesome people. The inspiration that they get from each other, I've never seen before. I mean, this is truly a match made in heaven, these two. And you listen to Kim and his stories, and we had some great chuckles yesterday with some of the stories, but really heartfelt. And when they look at each other and they talk about each other, it's just so glowing. I mean, it's just incredible. And sometimes you figure, sometimes when somebody gets a disease, do they really stay together and help each other? Sometimes people pull apart. But these people are joined together forever. And if you get a chance, and I forget which issue it was of The Voice, but read their story. They're just fantastic people. But, Kim is really Joyce's hero. And you get that from reading through their story. She's been so inspired with the help of Kim that she now runs an African American support team, a group where they meet and they talk about things, because obviously we're finding now that in the African American community there's also a high incident of scleroderma as well. So here she is dealing with all her own issues, and yet her selflessness in putting together this support group. And as Kim says, somebody calls and wants something, she's there in a heartbeat, even if she's not feeling well. So let's give her another round of applause. But I loved what Kim had to say. He said, "Joyce has truly taught me that living with scleroderma is part of a journey. And how you pack for that journey is a coping strategy that is designed new daily." How about that? That's so powerful. So again, my new friends, I love you guys, and thanks for now being part of my life as well. And also some of our other heroes that we have. I met this young gal, and I don't know if she's here, Landry and her dad. Is Landry and Charles here? But she's a little 12-year-old girl. She was diagnosed I think less than a year ago, a couple months ago maybe, 12 years old. She's got this big smile on her face. And I told her, I said, young lady, you need to keep that smile on your face. You need to keep that attitude. And she goes, I've got a good attitude. And named Landry, because even though they don't live in, I don't think, maybe they did live in Texas, I'm not sure. But he named her after Tom Landry, the former coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So can't be all that bad, right? And when we had also in the opening on Friday night, we had Mary Woolley, who talked about being advocates and talked about us spreading the word. Whenever I talk to groups with scleroderma, or even people that are friends of mine that don't know about the disease, what always gets me is the fact that when I say the word ALS, I would pretty much say 99.9% of everybody in this room knows what that is. All right? It only affects roughly 30,000 people. And when I say the word scleroderma, when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd have an audience maybe this size, and I was lucky if I maybe got 2 or 3 hands that went up. Now when I speak, I get about 40% of the room raises their hand. But still, scleroderma affects roughly 300,000 people. It kind of pisses me off, you know? Yeah, I don't blame you. And we have some great advocates, Queen Latifah, Jason Alexander, Barry Sanders. But yet, I wish that they would maybe, with their platform and their bully pulpit, if you will, to talk about it a little bit more. I saw her mother, Queen Latifah and her mother on the Meredith Vieira show. Great, great program. But then after that, it was like, so as Mary, what's up? Yeah, Bob Saget is still with us. Yeah. And what's interesting is that, we have them as our voice, but it's not enough. We need to be that voice. And one of the things that we can all start doing is getting more involved in our support groups. Matter of fact, I met with Jay Peak from the Tri-State, as well as Mary Beth over here. And we're going to look to start a men's scleroderma page, because let's face it, guys, we tend to not want to talk about it, just like we never want to talk about how we're feeling sometimes, right? Oh, honey, how are you feeling? Football game's on in 5 minutes, I can't talk right now. So we're going to start that, so if any males are interested, I'll be at my booth later on where I'll be autographing my book for people if they're interested, and give me your contact information, and I'm going to talk about some other scleroderma pages Facebook pages before we finish up, but we really want to start that aspect of it as well, because I think it's a part where, again, I was like that for many years where, I didn't like to talk about it, but now that I've written my book, and I feel that God gave me a second chance to be alive. And I think that purpose is to be able to be an advocate, to be a loud advocate. And I want to be able to share that. And for all of you, whether you have this disease or not, I'm a firm believer that everybody has a book within them. So think about that. Think about your story. Think about your message. And think about writing a book. Or writing articles that you can submit to The Voice. You can submit to maybe your local newsletter. And that's the way, or even to your local newspaper. Those are the ways that we can start creating a groundswell. Like dropping that pebble in the middle of the lake and watching the wakes go out further and further and further. And that's why we come to these conferences. Yes, we come from camaraderie. We come to be able to console each other and to understand each other, but we're also here to be advocates. Because as you know, we're our best advocate. So therefore, we can be an advocate for this disease to someday find a damn cure for it. Okay? All right. So what I'd also like to do is for those people who are living with scleroderma that are in this room right now, if you are able to, would you please stand up? For those sitting, look to your left. Look to your right. Look behind you. And look in front of you. We are the faces of scleroderma. We are the ones who suffer in silence. But while we're suffering in silence, we're also your inspiration. We're the ones who are resilient. When you're having a bad day, you realize your bad day isn't as bad as it really is when you're being a support or a caregiver for somebody who has scleroderma. So for those who are caregivers and support teams, give these people a round of applause. Also, throughout today, and even when you get home, on your Facebook pages, and most people are on Facebook, please use the hashtag #UnmaskTheCure. Let's see if everybody in this room, and then you share it on Facebook, get your friends to share it, let's start a trend. Let's get this word trending so that it starts kind of like a fire, just starting to build and build and grow and grow. Unmask the cure. So whether it's Facebook, whether it's on your LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, whether it's on your Twitter account, whatever it might be, for the next 30 days, whenever you communicate with anybody regarding scleroderma, please use this hashtag, because this is another way that we can start that momentum building for this. So what are we? We are fighters and we are survivors. We fight every day. We fight sometimes to get up. You know? We fight sometimes to keep getting too emotional about it, because it is. I mean, I met some people here over the last couple days, and my heart goes out to them. I feel so blessed that even though a lot of my issues are internally, that it hasn't affected me externally as much as others. And sometimes, guys, I feel kind of guilty. You know, I feel blessed, but I also feel guilty. When I spoke in 2013 in Atlanta, I told Jack Armitage, our executive director for the New England chapter, I said, Jack, I don't even feel like I belong here. And he says, no, Andrew, you do, because you're part of the family. And so that, to me, is a very, very powerful part of what we all are, but making sure that we keep everybody, you know, in our thoughts and in our prayers as well. So let's talk about facing life's curveballs. As Robert was talking about, I have always been a motivator, a turnaround specialist. I was always the overachiever. I was the one that if there was something on my desk at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, I had to get it done. It couldn't wait till tomorrow. Why? I don't know. Maybe it was the work ethic. That, you know, if you're a baby boomer, we have grown up with an incredible work ethic that we got from our grandparents, that we got from our parents. You know, and it was always that, you know, if you got to get the job done, you got to do it yourself. And unless you're on your deathbed, you got to go to work, right? I mean, that's how we grew up. And so I was just hired as vice president of sales and operations for one of the first internet online apartment search companies, where you could actually go online, look for an apartment with photos and floor plans and videos and all of that. It was called All Apartments. We then changed our name to Spring Street. We then merged with Realtor.com and created a mega site called Homestore.com. It's now called Move. And it was a typical startup. If anyone's been in a startup, you know it's crazy. I had to build a sales structure from the ground up. At first, you know, I was doing 14, 16-hour work days, 5 days a week. And then I realized that I had 100 people I was responsible for. I had 7 direct reports to me. And I found that Andrew had no time during the week to get his stuff done because I had to take care of all these salespeople, all these service people, operations people. So then I started coming in on Saturdays. And some of the, I used to call them my brown noses, my salespeople, realized that to be successful, it was more, and especially in sales, it's more than a 5-day work week. So now, I'd be in the office on a Saturday getting work done, and all of a sudden, I'd hear the door. And I had a smile on my face because, those are the people that wanted to be successful because they were putting in the extra time. Well, look out what you asked for, because now they'd come into my office and we'd talk strategy, we'd talk about, troubled accounts that they had, how we're going to close these people, how we're going to get them to do business with us. So now Saturdays didn't work for me either. So then I started coming in on Sundays. Now I'm working 80-plus hours a week, 7 days a week, but the motivator and the intoxication of it, as with most startup companies, were the stock options. And, you'd look at people like, now Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and all these other companies that we were seeing that were going public were almost overnight, they were becoming millionaires. So that was my focus. It was like, imagine cashing out and never having to work another day unless you chose to work. And that was so overriding, it was so laser focused that I forgot about me. I forgot about taking care of me. I was traveling all over the country, I wasn't eating properly, I wasn't working out, I wasn't relieving the stress that I was keeping within my body. So I started started waking up in the middle of the night with pins and needles and tightness in my hands. And I'm 40 years old. And I'm like, I must have just slept on my hands. Let's push it to the back of my head because I've got a job to do. I've got a team I got to run. I got stock options I got to cash out on. And so then in February of 1999, my executive assistant says, go, because I don't really complain a lot, but she goes, you're always like squeezing your hands. You okay? I said, yeah, they're a little tight and get like tingling in them. She goes, well, go see a doctor. So I went to this general practitioner, and I'd also noticed a couple nights early when I would play my guitar that after I'd play, I'd get these shooting, almost like little electricity shots down my fingers. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? But again, you're 40 years old, you're invincible, nothing can hurt you, you got that big S on your shirt because you're a Superman. And I went to the general practitioner, and he goes, well, how old are you? And I said, well, I'm 40. He goes, you got rheumatoid arthritis. Now, my father had rheumatoid arthritis in his hands. My grandmother did as well. So I'm like, well, okay. But then it started to get into my feet, where I'd wake up in the morning, I'd put my feet to the floor, and it felt as if somebody took a stick and beat my feet in the middle of the night. And it would take me 5 or 10 minutes to walk around the house getting the blood flowing again out of my feet. And I'm like going, man, this just doesn't seem right. Well, we kept on this whole rheumatoid arthritis thing, and they were putting me on some aspirin and this and that. But now it started to creep into my shoulders, into my hips, into my knees, into my elbows. Even to the point where when I would chew, I would swell up on my temples about half of the size of a golf ball. And I'm like, man, this can't be arthritis. So I moved from our office in Scottsdale and then moved up to our office in San Francisco, October of 1999. I went to see a rheumatoid arthritic specialist there, and he looked at my hands, touched my hands, did some pinching of my skin, ran some tests, and he came back and he said, you have scleroderma. And I said, as probably all you have, sclero what? I mean, I was like, can you spell that for me, please? He then proceeded to tell me that it was an autoimmune disease, connective tissue disease, that had no cause and no cure. Here I was, living life to the fullest, just loving life. And all of a sudden, as I talk about in my book, A Celebration of Life, that I think God finally took the proverbial 2x4 and smacked me across the forehead with it. And I remember holding the back of the chair because I almost passed out. I just, all of a sudden my whole life, as you all understand, was just the carpet was pulled out right from underneath my feet. And then he proceeded to tell me that 80% of people who get it are female, and of them, there's a 50% mortality rate within 10 years. And this was October of 1999. Of course, being kind of a humorist myself and joking, I kind of looked at him and I went, sure, I had to go out and get a chick's disease. So then I said to him, well, what do we do? Because I ran businesses where there was a solution to every problem. Every problem could be fixed if you worked at it. And he goes, we're just going to have to let it run its course. I'm like, what? So that was it, and I put it to the back of my mind. It took me 3 days to call my family. They're all in the Boston area. I'm out in San Francisco. I was like, how can I explain this to them? Face-to-face is one thing, but for you mothers out there to get a call from one of your children who's 2,400 miles away, that's not cool. So I finally did talk to them, and of course I downplayed the whole thing. I didn't tell them that there was no cure. I said, they're working on it. I'll follow back up with you. But it really, as I look at it, and as I mentioned, it is the uninvited guest. It's like that relative that comes over and they never leave. Remember Saturday Night Live with John Belushi, and then they used to do the guests that wouldn't leave and they would just sit on the couch the whole time? Yeah. That's sort of what this is. We didn't invite it in, but it's part of us now. And one of the things that I found important when I was first diagnosed was that, just like in military, to beat an enemy, you've got to define who that enemy is so you know how to go after it. Well, it's the same with us. We need to identify it. We need to embrace it. Can't deny it because it's there. And that's one of the ways that we can at least help ourselves in that recovery. So I kept continuing on with work and working hard, and just any aches and pains I had, I wouldn't even think about them. Because again, I had a job to do. That's how I grew up. Like I said, unless I was on my deathbed, I had to go to work every day. I had to travel around the country, and it was just, again, all nonstop. I just returned, ironically, from New Orleans. I returned from a trade show here with the National Apartment Association on June 24th of 2000. I was younger then, so I was partying my butt off down on Bourbon Street. But the whole week at the trade show with my team, I was very tired, very lethargic. A couple mornings I didn't even feel like I wanted to get out of bed. And that's not like me. So I knew that something wasn't right. But I still kept pushing it to the back of my mind. And I'm sure many of you have done that same thing. Where, I used to tease my mother all the time, the ostrich with the head in the sand, hopefully it goes away. But as we find out, this doesn't go away. So I went into my office on Monday the 25th. My executive assistant says, you really don't look good. I'm like, well, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. So she goes, why don't you go get some blood work? So I went to get some blood work, and the doctor called me back at my house later on that night to say, your blood work shows we've got some concerns with some kidney issues. I'm like, okay, how'd it go from the scleroderma thing to now kidney issues? So I set up an appointment for June 29th, which again, ironically, happens to be World Scleroderma Day. So, go figure, right? I'd gone to bed with a headache that night, and I never get headaches because I really don't let things bother me. I've always been that way. And so I remember going to bed, and I put a cold face cloth on my forehead. I woke up the next morning, And as I woke up, I looked up at my ceiling fan, and it was a little blurry. So my typical routine is I go into the bathroom, I throw cold water on my face, get the sleepies out of my eyes. And I noticed when I was drying off my hands and my face that my hands were going in and out of focus. And my headache was like severe now. So I popped some aspirin, and I'm like, well, yeah, this just doesn't, something now is wrong. Now it's going from the back of my head to the front of my head where maybe there's something I should be doing here. So I went to call my ex-girlfriend who lived right down the street. Well, not only couldn't I remember her phone number, I couldn't remember her name. Now I'm like, yo, dude, something's going on. I finally picked up the phone, and I couldn't even see the numbers on the phone, but I knew where 0 was, and I hit 0, and I got an operator. I told her that I needed to get a hold of a coworker. I remembered his last name, McCarthy, and I knew that he had, in the last 4 digits of his phone number, there were 2 zeros side by side. She goes, sir, do you want me to dial 911? No, because I have a kidney appointment at 9 o'clock that I have to get to. She's like, really, sir? And I'm like, yeah. Again, stubborn Italian. What am I going to tell you? So she went down 83 McCarthys and found Robert McCarthy. She goes, does the 4 digits 0046 sound familiar? I go, that's it. So she dialed. I said, Rob, I got an appointment at 9 o'clock. I'm not feeling well. Can you come over and drive me? Because I can't see. Now everything was sort of just a gray blur. Still, not really sure what was going on. So I ended up, he came in, and I remember he had to walk me with my arm to his car. We drove from Scottsdale to Phoenix, on 12th Street in Phoenix to my nephrologist, and I had actually at one point put down the window and threw up out the window, not knowing what that signified at the time. We pull into the parking lot. I was put into a wheelchair, and the last thing I remember was slumping over to my right side. 28 hours later, I woke up out of a coma. This Dr. Moffitt, and I was starting to come through. I'm hearing these bleeps and bloops and machines, and saw all these lines in me, and I'm like, Jesus, what the hell did you do? Was this an after effect of Bourbon Street, or what the heck was it? So he comes over to me, and he said, and I'll never forget these words, young man, you're lucky to be alive. And I went to talk, and it felt like razor blades in my throat. He says, you don't have to talk. He said, we had to intubate you because you weren't able to breathe on your own. And I'm like, dude, what the heck is going on here? He says, let me ask you some questions. Just said, nod either way. Do you know what happened to you? And I went, I said, okay. Let me ask you another question. Do you know what your name is? And I'm like, oh, this is an easy one. I was given this name when I was a baby. And I went to say something, and then I went, I didn't even know my own name. The concern in his face, you could cut it with a knife. He then said, well, we're going to need to transfer you over to the Barrows Neurological Institute in Phoenix because you're showing symptoms of a stroke patient. He said, when you were admitted to the ER, when they had sent me from the nephrologist's office to the Arizona Heart Hospital, my blood pressure was 270 over 170. I had hemorrhaging in the brain. The left ventricle of my heart collapsed, and I went into a coma. The doctors at the ER basically said, we've done all we can do for him. It's up to him. So before they were putting me on the gurney to bring me over across town to the Neurological Institute, the doctor said to me, he goes, I got one more question for you. He says, do you know who that is over there in the corner? And I tried to focus my eyes, and I said, it's my mom. What's she doing here? Here I didn't even know my own name, but I knew my mom. The power of a mother and a child, it was just overwhelming. And she rode with me in the hospital, in the ambulance over to Barrows Neurological Institute, where I would spend 13 days. The first part of this journey, obviously, as many of you have also faced and lived through, is the despair. You know, again, why me? Why is this happening to me? I was in a hospital where I was in intensive care for the first 7 days, recovery for 6 days after that. But again, all those questions, why me? Why me? What's the purpose? Because I've always been a firm believer that there's a purpose and reason for everything. But what was this purpose? It was interesting that, you know, I had my mom and dad were there, and but they wouldn't let my cousins come in because they weren't immediate family. So the next thing that happened was that I immediately had to go on dialysis. And they had to put a catheter in my chest for dialysis. And I remember when I went in for the first time, because I had to get a second one, that the doctor wanted to put me under, to put the catheter. I'm going, oh, no, 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 no. I just came out of a coma, and you're going to put me back in one? So I go, what are my alternatives? He said, well, we can do local anesthesia. He said, but you're going to feel the tube being pushed up underneath your skin. I said, I don't care. I said, you're not going to put me under. And he said, okay. He says, what kind of music do you like? I go, do you have any Led Zeppelin? So he cranked some Led Zeppelin for me, and I went through that and then started taking daily dialysis at that point. But in the hospital, you know, every hour on the hour they had to come in and they had to, you know, poke you and prod you and draw blood from you and take your vitals every hour. And it was pretty overwhelming. Again, at nighttime when you're there by yourself, you have a lot of time to contemplate. And again, how did this happen? How did I get here? Now, they had been putting me on a renal diet of sticky rice, white rice, and Swedish meatballs. Okay? Once is okay. For the third lunch in a row, she comes in, and I'm like, aren't you guys like creative at all? You know, I mean, so I just, now my Italian stubbornness kicked in, and I'm like, I'm not going to eat this crap. So my parents, when they would come to visit me, would always come up with some ice cream. And you know, I knew that the cafeteria was on the first floor. So the third time that they brought me my meal, I'm like, don't want it. So I still wasn't really able to walk on my own. My dad would walk me around the top, on the 5th floor to, you know, trying to get my, because again, still hadn't had the coordination down yet. And so I get up out of bed and I shuffle. I was about this fast. I shuffled over to my door, and right across in the lobby was where the nurses' station was. And I looked over, and there were no nurses. I'm like, I'm going to make a break for the cafeteria. So I'm shuffling across the lobby like this, and I had scrubs on. I wasn't going to put no Johnny on me. So I'm shuffling. I get to the elevator. I hit the elevator door. It opens up. I go down to the first floor. And the elevator door opens up, and I look and I see the neon sign that said cafeteria. And so I'm like, all right, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. And people looking at me as they're walking by going, you know, and I probably haven't shaved in 4 or 5 days. My hair was probably up all over the place. Back when I was 40, I had a little bit more hair than I do now. So I get in there, and I saw my prize, a slice of pepperoni pizza. So I get the pizza, and I get a Sprite because I wasn't able to have any dark, no coffee, no Coke, because anything dark that your body had problems, your kidney processing it. So now I shuffle up to the register, and all of a sudden I realize I got no money. So I look at the lady and I'm like, you know, because I've been living out of hotels for years and decades, just traveling with business, and I go, can I charge it to my room? And she says, yeah, you can charge it to your room. I'm like, awesome. So I finished my pizza, finished my Sprite, And then I make my trek back to the elevator. Oh my God, it was just crazy. And so I'm like, okay, I got to get up there. I got to get back in my room, and then they'll never miss me. So the elevator door opens up, and there's 3 nurses standing there with their hands on their hips, going, "Where have you been?" And I'm like, "Oh, you know, the meatball thing, the sticky rice." I said, "The pizza." And they pointed at my chest, and I went, I had a heart monitor on. As soon as I left the 5th floor, my alarm went off. They think I'm having a cardiac arrest in my room. They go running in there. There's no Andrew. So they run to the bathroom. No Andrew. They run to my closet. No Andrew. They ran to every room on the floor. They went into every bathroom. They went into, storage closets, the janitor's closet, looking for me. And I was like a little puppy with his tail between its legs. I went back to my bed. And I said, "But you got to call Dr. Chris Machetian, who was my doctor at the time." And I said, "We got to compromise. I got to have pizza at least every other day, or I could commit suicide. I'm sorry. The meatballs and the sticky rice just aren't going to cut it." So I got my way. But I also spent a lot of that time in the hospital reassessing my life. And I realized that I was chasing the wrong things. I was more concerned about the glory, the money, than I was about living a full and fruitful life. A life of giving back. A life of, really worrying about other people more than worrying about myself. And had a lot of time to reflect. And one of the things that I really realized, and I knew this also as a motivational speaker and a turnaround specialist, was that we have the ability within us to do amazing things. Every single one of us. And I realized that we have 2 weapons at our disposal. And I don't care what type of illness you're going through. I don't care what type of tragedy, or whether it's, medical, whether it's financial, whether it's relationship-wise. We all have the ability to call on these 2 weapons. The first one is positive thinking, positive mental attitude. Descartes was the one who said, "I think, therefore I am." And we have that ability. And again, sometimes, as I made up my mind in the hospital, that for me to beat it, I had to become stronger than it. And I had to come every day with my A game. Even though there were times where I had pity parties, I was the only one that I invited. I didn't invite my parents. Every time they came into my hospital room, I had a big smile on my face. I feel great. Everything's good. And then when they would leave, I sometimes went into some different stages of depression. Because who wouldn't? I mean, your life's moving forward 100 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden, the emergency brake is pulled on you. And the other one is perseverance. Think about as a kid, every time, even in the playground, when you got knocked down, what did you do? You got back up again. In life, if you lost a job or you got fired, what did you do? You went out and got another job. Perseverance is an incredible asset that we all have. And we need to call on these. We're going to have to call on them sometimes more times than others. But everyone in this room, everyone outside this room, have these 2 weapons at our disposal. So on those days that you're not feeling good, like those days that you want to give up, remember this. It's within you. We have incredible power within us. And we need to unleash it sometimes for us to get through our days. As Vince Lombardi said, it's not whether you get knocked down, but it's whether you get back up again. What great words. What a great man. And so, as we go through our process that we're dealing with scleroderma, I want to share another story with you. Purpose and a reason. We all got this disease for a reason. Some of us may know what that reason is now. Others may not get it for a while, and maybe some people will never understand why this happened to me. I was now doing dialysis in dialysis units. And I was getting 3.5 hours a day, 3 days a week. I was going to dialysis. Has anyone here been on dialysis? 2.5 years. It is, in my opinion, the most humbling experience anybody can go through. You are hooked up to a machine that without this machine, you die. It takes your blood out, it cleans your blood, it also takes your water weight. I used to call it my dialysis diet because I would lose 6 to 7 pounds of water weight because I wasn't able to urinate because my kidneys were shut down. So I'd be like, they'd weigh you before you go in and then weigh you afterwards. And I'm like, oh, cool, man, I just lost 7 pounds. I try to find humor with this disease because if not, I'd probably spend more time being despondent than not. And, as I always say as well, God's got a great sense of humor, doesn't he, sometimes? So I'm in the dialysis unit. I first started in Scottsdale, and then when I moved back home, because I found myself, I didn't want to obligate my friends to either drop me off or pick me up for dialysis, and because you're not supposed to drive yourself, I started driving myself. And the nurse would say, you have somebody picking you up, and I would park way down so that they couldn't see my vehicle. And I said, oh, yeah, I got somebody picking me up. And I would drive myself home. Well, I could have passed out or whatever. So I realized at that point that it was time to go home. So I told Mom and Dad that I was going to move back home to the Boston area. So I started going to dialysis in Weymouth. But both in Scottsdale and in Weymouth, I kept telling the doctors, I'm going to be off of this in 6 months. And they said, well, Andrew, we appreciate your enthusiasm. They would then point around the room going, well, this person's been on it for 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. Some people were waiting for transplants. What they were hoping with me, I had acute failure. And they were hoping through the process of dialysis to be able to kickstart the kidney so that I wouldn't need to have a transplant. So that was their hope. But I kept telling them, I'm going to be off of this in 6 months. After my third dialysis treatment, after the first and second one, I'd come home, go right to bed because it just exhausts you. And I would lay in bed and I'd be going, God, why me? Why did this happen to me? What's the purpose? What's the purpose and reason? And I wouldn't get an answer. So the third time I came home from dialysis and I went straight to bed and I'm lying in bed again and I'm like going, because if you've ever been in a dialysis unit, when you walk by a lot of these patients who most of them are older, elderly, all there is in their faces is despair. You can see that they have no hope in their faces. They're just laying there like this, and some people would moan, going, oh, I want to die, let me die. And here I am, this is my third day, and I'm like going, is this going to be me? Is this what my life is going to be like? So on the third day, I went home. I'm in bed. And I'm going, God, why me? And all of a sudden, I heard a voice say, maybe it's not about you, Andrew. And excuse me. 16 years later, and it's still like it was yesterday. So I started thinking about that. And I'm going, it's not about me. Then who is it about? And as soon as I said that, I saw all the faces of the people in the dialysis unit. And I went, that's my purpose and reason. So on my fourth treatment, as I came into the room, I walked up to everybody on my path to my chair. I introduced myself. How you doing? What are you doing here? I would tell them my story. They'd tell me their story. I'd say, geez, you only got 1 hour left. I said, I got 3.5 hours left. You'll be out of here before me. I started making them laugh. I started getting them to smile. And I started seeing the despair disappear. I started seeing hope in their eyes again. So as I was in my chair, one of the nurses says, she goes, Andrew, she goes, I don't believe, because I used to tease the nurses all the time, she goes, I don't believe the effect that you're having on people. I said, what did I do now? She said, when the patients call to schedule their dialysis treatment, they want to know if you're going to be there. And I sat in my chair and I cried like a baby, because then I knew the reason I got this disease wasn't about Andrew, but it was to help other people get through their ordeal. And that's why I'm such a big advocate today for this disease and for how it affects everybody. And it was really just, if I can make a difference in the lives of other people, that's what's important to me. And so whether it's through my speaking, through my work as the chair of the Plymouth Walk, Scleroderma Walk, or working with the New England chapter, and being here and speaking to you guys as well, again, that's my purpose. I ask you to search in your hearts and find out what your purpose is, because we all have one. God just didn't put us on this planet for no reason. We all have a purpose. So as part of your journey, like as part of my journey, is to find out what that purpose is. I know that stress was a big trigger for me. Obviously, I was just going nuts. I remember in 2004, my doctor at BU Medical, Dr. Korn, the late Dr. Korn, rest his soul, I would tell him that I knew this was from stress. And he was like going, well, we can't medically prove it, so, I appreciate it, Andrew, but nah, it's not, But prior to kind of putting this all together, just jumping back to the dialysis, as I had mentioned to you, I kept telling the doctors that I was going to be off of this in 6 months. I had one doctor that said to me, I said, I'm going to be off of this in 6 months, and he pointed at me while I'm in my chair, hooked up, he says, Andrew, and he scolded me, you don't know what you're dealing with. And I pointed up in his face and I said, no, you don't know who you're dealing with. I'm off of this in 6 months. And by the grace of God, the prayers from thousands of people around the country, and my own sheer determination to beat this disease, 5.5 months later, I came off of dialysis. And once I did, a lot of the external manifestations started to reverse at such an alarming rate that the doctors still today have no explanation why. I started getting suppleness back in my arms. I was getting the claw, and now my hand, even though they're still tight and stiff, I'm back playing guitar. I play once a month at a local restaurant, which was my love was guitar playing. And so, but stress was my trigger. Recently, my mother passed in June of 2014. A month later, I ended up getting finger ulcers and wasn't able to play guitar for a year. Then last February of 2015, March of 2015, started getting this little cough. And first I thought it might have been some allergies, so I had to go through all these allergy tests. Finally, I was the one who demanded, because we're our best advocates, remember? I want a pulmonary function test and I want a CAT scan. February of 2016, I was diagnosed with interstitial lung disease. So my journey's beginning all over again. But I'm still going to have those two weapons at my disposal, because I beat it once, and damn it, I'm going to beat it again. And that's what we all need to strive for. And it was interesting, when I went to the 2013 Atlanta conference, it was the first time that doctors were talking about stress as possibly being a trigger. And I looked up in heaven and said, see, Dr. Korn, I told you. But so we got to do things to reduce our stress. The biggest thing that I found over the years is that a lot of stress that we have, we put it there. We cause a lot of our own stress. So therefore, if we put it there, we can also take it away. So think about that. Only worry about the things that you have control over. You know, people that get stressed out because they're sitting in traffic, first question I ask you is, did you cause the traffic jam? And if you say no, then don't worry about it. But how many people get by? Argh! That causes immediate stress into your body. As Dale Carnegie said, you know, because we want to take, you know, tasks one at a time. We multitask, don't we? We all multitask. Especially today, we got like 9 gadgets going on at one time, especially the younger kids. But Dale Carnegie talked about, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay? So when you're dealing with a lot of our issues, whether it's a bunch of doctor appointments or these tests and everything, take them one at a time. Because if we start to get stressed out about it, I think, in my case as well, I think that was part of it. And then we really need to keep a balance in our lives. There's 3 areas. It's like a stool can stand with 3 legs. So the 3-legged stool, in finding balance in your life, is your mind, your body, and your spirit. This thing up here, between our ears, is the most powerful tool. It's even stronger than any man-made material. It's stronger than any computer. This has the ability to move mountains. But a lot of times we just get a lot of craziness in our minds. So try to ease your mind. Meditate. I find that journaling is extremely helpful for me. I've got probably 3 journals that I've already filled out. So, write down how you're feeling someday. If you aren't able to write because of this disease, get Dragonfly that you can talk into your computer and it will type for you. So try to use some of the technology there to be helpful for yourself. And of course, our body. Some of us that living with scleroderma, we have the ability to maybe do a little bit more than others. Some of the people that are in wheelchairs obviously don't have that ability, but we can still push ourselves a little bit with movements and try to get maybe arms to move a little bit more. I try even with lung disease, I ride my bike 7 miles. I try to walk on the treadmill 2 to 4 miles. Yeah, it beats the crap out of me, but I'm going to push myself. I'm going to keep pushing myself because the stronger that we can build up our stamina, that helps in the long run. And then our spirit. Whatever your belief systems are, there is a higher power. And I talked to many of you over the last couple of days, and at some point in our conversation, you brought up the grace of God. And whether you believe or not, there is a higher power out there. Lean on that power. We can't do it ourselves all the time. Give it to him or her, depending how you look at it, and they'll take care of you. They truly will. So as we celebrate our heroes, I really, again, want to thank everybody for this opportunity. As I mentioned, we're going to try to put together a men's scleroderma group, but in the meantime, there's some great ones. These are all on Facebook, Scleroderma Angels. If you're not on any of these, please join some of them. The feedback, the postings and everything are fantastic. Then there's Project Scleroderma, Dear Scleroderma, another one on Facebook. These are videos that people are doing. Then there's Scleroderma.inspire. These are some that I've come across over the last year or so. And then my favorite one, is Jessica here with her mom this morning? There she is. Stand up, darling. She has, and I got her bracelet here, Scleroderma Strong. This young woman, look at the ones that got them as well. There we go. This young woman not only made me cry when I saw her video, but she inspired me to do more. And she is an incredible young lady, an incredible family. And if you get a chance before you leave, please go meet Jessica. She's a sweetheart. So as I mentioned to you, We are all fighters. We are survivors. Thank you for being part of this group. What I want you to do is leave here today learning some of these new relationships, fostering some of these new relationships, realizing that there is hope for each and every one of us. Because what I want you to do is I want you to go out and celebrate your life. Thank you very much.